I am John Philip Toelkes. I was born in the Copper Queen Hospital in Bisbee, Arizona, November 19, 1933. My mother is Mary Ellen Ryan Toelkes. My father, James Nicholas Toelkes. My father was the son of German immigrants who came to Kansas in the 1880s. This is a declaration of intention to become a citizen of the United States of America. My grandfather emigrated here from Germany in the late 1880s up until probably the 1950s or maybe the 1960s. The largest immigrant group ethnically were Germans. The Toelkes family actually came from the Rhineland in Germany. In German, it was spelt T with the O, with the double umlauts over the O, which kind of extended it. There was no E, and then it was L-K-E-S. So T, umlaut O, L-K-E-S. Toelkes, I think is how it would be pronounced. Grandmother, Lucy Kramer Toelkes, was born in Pronsfeld, Germany, what is now Germany. And my grandfather, John, was born in Niederlau, the Rhineland, which was probably 8 or 10 miles from Pronsfeld, where grandmother came from. He emigrated from Germany because he didn't want to be conscripted in another war. He had fought in one of the Franco-Prussian wars. I think he may have been slightly wounded in one of these wars, the war he fought in, and as a result he was unmarried, he was a young man, so he came to the U.S. His ship came to port in Philadelphia, and he went from Philadelphia then to western Kansas. Grandmother's family, both her parents died when she was quite young. I think she was the youngest of her family, and all of her siblings moved to the United States. And they lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Grandmother and grandfather married in 1887. This was probably as much as anything an arranged marriage, because the proximity of their villages in Germany, and I'm sure that there was some family knowledge of one another, and I think that's probably how it happened, because grandfather was I think at least 12 years older than grandmother. This is the naturalization document that shows that my grandfather and grandmother became citizens of the United States of America. My grandfather was John, my grandmother was Lucy. The 10th day of January 1911, and this was the 135th year of a nation, of the United States being a nation. This was a big thing in their lives. They both moved here from Germany. They married here. They gave up their heritage, so to speak, to come here to be farmers in Kansas and to raise 12 children. Their ages and the ages of their children that remained at home are listed on here. Dad was the 10th of 12 children. He did not want to be a farmer, and in fact he actually ran away from home when he was 15 years old and joined the Navy. I think that maybe he was afraid that his parents were going to kind of steer him toward the priesthood, because he was more bookish, let's say, than the other brothers in the family, and he'd always been a great reader. And I think that probably they thought maybe he would become a priest, and he wasn't having any part of that. Unfortunately, his naval career didn't last very long, because he broke his femur, his right femur, in Boston. He was in the Naval Hospital for several months, and then he was discharged with a slight disability, for which he received an $8 or $10 pension for the remainder of his life, $8 or $10 a month. And then he kind of began to wander, and at some point in time he was in Bisbee, Arizona, where he met my mother and where they married in 1930. He loved working in the mines, hard rock mines, never coal mine or anything like this. This would be underground mining. He loved every bit of it, did it for many, many years, and I don't think he ever tired of it. Mother's family emigrated to Bisbee from England in 1908. They were Irish people who had moved to England to work in the mines in England, and then they were recruited to come to Bisbee and work in the copper mines there. My sister Maureen was born in 1931, I was born in 1933, and Kathleen was born in 1939. Mother's side of the family, as I said, emigrated to Bisbee, Arizona. I think they were probably recruited to come as miners. And Mother was more or less adopted, whatever, by her Aunt Mary, who was my grandmother's older sister. I think that probably my grandmother became pregnant with my Aunt Winnie very early on after my mother's birth, and as a result, I think Mary, they probably lived next door to one another, and I think just Mary and her husband Huey more or less raised my mother. And the reason I say this is that my mother never talked very much about her mother or about her family, and it wasn't I never detected any resentment of any kind. I just think that it was maybe not much of an issue. Now her siblings, of course, she was very close to her sisters and her brother. Mother and Winnie both didn't finish high school. They started working when they were about 16 years old in the Fair department store in Bisbee, and then later they worked in the post office. They were postal clerks in the post office. And being in the postal office in a small town like Bisbee, Arizona, they knew everybody's business. And they knew who the Ku Klux Klan people were who had emigrated there from the South and from Texas, and they knew who these were and those were. It was kind of interesting. My dad was a miner, and as I said, loved it. Worked for Phelps Dodge Mining Corporation in Bisbee, which was a company town, so to speak. When he worked up to being a foreman, yeah. He had an area that he worked, and he had a responsibility, say at certain times, to get so many carloads of ore of such and such a grade out, so it could be sent to the smelter in Douglas, which was 20 miles away. When they came out they came out of the mine, they would go into a change room, and there they would change out of their mining clothes and put into their more or less civilian clothes, and then the mining clothes were all put on hooks, and they were lifted up very, very high into this big change room, and they had big windows up there so that these clothes would dry out. And of course, going into the mines, they all had a token with their number on it that they would put in so that they were showing that they were going underground. And so when they came out of the mine, they picked that token up also so that nobody was lost down there. The miners for a long time did not have electricity underground, but they did have carbide lamps, which were little lamps that you put carbide in and water, and it would ignite and burn. And it had a reflector, and they had stuck up here on their on their mining helmets, so to speak. Well, in fact, when Dad went into the mines in Bisbee, one of his first jobs was to blindfold and tie up the mules that were working underground that they brought up because they'd gotten electricity underground, and all the ore cars and one thing and another underground now were electric powered as opposed to being pushed and pulled by mules. My father liked to keep moving. But anyway, after, of course, being born during the Depression, he would search for jobs, and so we came to California, and he worked on several of the water projects, tunneling primarily, that fed water from the Sierras, actually, and from the Colorado River to the Los Angeles area. We lived in Beaumont and Banning, and then He went back to Bisbee, and then during the Second World War, we moved to Long Beach. My parents bought a house at 4614 Levante in Long Beach, California. And Maureen and I went to school. My older sister Maureen and I went to school at St. Anthony's there. Maureen was a little bossy, so she and I didn't get along until we were in our 20s. And that was probably more my fault than Maureen's. But and then Kathleen, of course, she was 6 years younger, and as a result, I didn't pay a lot of attention to her because, you know, she was just a little girl, and I had big things to do. Oh yeah, as I was growing, the shipyards were working 24/7. You could see, at night you could see the welders' arcs where they were building ships, turning out ships in 9 and 10 days. California, of course, was heavily impacted by the armed forces. Some of my older cousins that were serving in the Navy visited us and stayed with us in Long Beach while we lived there. My cousin Bud, who was actually cousin Adolph, his name was Adolph, but everybody called him Bud, as you can understand why. We had rationings. All the cars had a coupon pasted to the windshield that told you how much gas they could have, and then you got gas. They got gas rations. We got rations for various types of food, meat primarily, dairy products. I remember they would hear that there was, say, butter at the grocery store, and Mother would give me money, and I'd run up to the grocery store and get in line and buy butter. I remember going to downtown Long Beach, standing in line outside of C's Candy to buy C's Candy for my great auntie when she was coming to visit. And it was a wonderful time in many respects because tremendous amount of unification in the country. People were focused on doing what we could to win the war. Dad, during the war, he worked in the shipyards. After the war, he worked for the Navy for a short time in an office that was in the post office building in downtown Long Beach. And then he was concerned, as I said, about a slowdown after the war, said he wanted to get back into mining, and he saw an opportunity to go to work in Peru. I think in January of 1947, he went to Lima, Peru, and went to work for Cerro de Pasco Copper Company. We traveled on the USS Santa Adela. It was a Grace Line ship. It was a passenger freighter. It had about 6 passenger cabins on it. The captain and sailors were all very accommodating. They were very nice to us. We actually took our dog with us. I had to build a crate for him because I told him that if the dog didn't go, I wasn't going to go.
What was the dog's name?
The dog's name was Freckles, and he lived with us 2 or 3 years in Peru and died. After we moved to Peru, Maureen and I went to school in Lima. Mother and Dad were up in the mountains with Kathleen at Cerro de Pasco, which was a big, huge mine that had been operated since the Spanish times. And we lived with a family, the last name was Gonzalez, and they were associated at one time with the Spanish embassy in Peru. The husband had died, the lady of the house had 3 children, and then the son, Alfredo, he was going to school at San Marcos University, which San Marcos was the first university in the New World. I didn't like the school, but I had lots of fun because I had lots of freedom. And I did very poorly scholastically, but it was a great life. As I said, I had so much freedom that I wasted a couple years of my education there very easily. Yeah. Well, for one thing, this was I was going to school with a bunch of very, very wealthy Peruvians and sons of corporate representatives from Europe and the United States. Yeah, you know, the chauffeured limousines picked them up and brought them to school. Yeah, and but it was, it was fine. I learned a lot, because Lima was a very safe place at the time. At least I thought, at least we thought it was. There was never any problem. And I had a very, very good friend whose father was Peruvian, his mother was American. His parents were divorced. This was Billy Schofield, and Billy and I got along real well because he didn't go to school very much either. So we spent a lot of time roaming around Lima. So school finished in Peru for the summer in December, and so we had from January until June to come back to when we were coming back to the States. So actually, I went to work on the farm, on the ranch that supplied meat for my father's company. It was owned by the Cerro de Pasco Copper Corporation. Ran huge numbers of sheep, probably 40,000 sheep. And I went to work there with the veterinarian that had actually started working for Cerro de Pasco about the same time my dad did. This guy's name was Douglas Watson, and he had just gotten out of the Army after World War II. Yeah, this is pretty well what I was interested in at that time, and that's why Dad contacted Dr. Watson and asked him if he could find a place for me up there. Yeah, we castrated calves and we treated sheep, vaccinated and wormed sheep while they were being shorn for their wool. My monthly wage was $7.50, which is what the Peruvian laborers made. But my bill at the hotel was about $20 a month. So my dad paid my bill at the hotel, and I had that $7.50 to spend any way I wanted to, except I was in a little village way in the world up in the Andes, and there was barely an electric light, let alone anything else to spend any money on. Yeah. From there we came back to the States, and we lived in Denver, and I went to high school at North High School in Denver, and that's when I decided I didn't want to go to high school anymore, so I quit school and a couple months later joined the Navy. During that time we took a lot of tests, and my interests were medical, so I went into the hospital corps. In March of 1953 I went to the USS Henrico. It was an attack transport, and then in September 1954 I was discharged and went back to El Paso. And
does that make you a Korean War vet?
Yes, and I went to started college at Texas Western College in El Paso. I loved El Paso. El Paso, Texas was a great place for me.
How so?
Just the people, the things to do, I just loved it. Attended school there for 3 years and then transferred to Texas A&M, and then I applied for vet school and started vet school in September 1958. The summer before I finished veterinary school, the summer of 1961, I went to work for the USDA, and I was stationed out of Austin, Texas. And at that time, friends of mine from El Paso were going to school there and were married, Jim and Elizabeth Tatum. And Jim Tatum had met Jameen Reno and they dated lightly, and Jim and Liz introduced me to Jameen Reno. We went to one of those restaurants out on Lake Austin, I guess. And
What'd you think of her?
What did I think of Jameen? Oh, I liked her very, very much, and I can't really tell you why. She was just very easy to meet, certainly very easy to talk to, and we just hit it off. We just blended well together, that's all. She was, of course, in school, and she was also, this time she was kind of a dorm counselor, and she had 2 or 3 jobs, and then she also had the laundry concession in the dorm where she picked up the laundry and distributed laundry for the girls. She was studying special education, and then she graduated in the spring of '63. And at that time, I was in Douglas. We talked, and she decided to come there to teach school there. And she'd been there for very short period of time, and we decided we better get married. So we married on October 19th, 1963. Philip was born there, and then we lived in Douglas for about 3 years, a little less than 3 years. I was doing some dog and cat as well as anything else. I was descenting skunks. I was doing all of it.
Wait a second, why do you have to descent the skunk?
We take the scent glands out so that they can make pets out of them. But anyway, that's not a very lucrative practice. But when you're hungry and young, well, you'll do anything. Anyway, so it sank in on me that we weren't going to do real well in Douglas. So I contacted my friend John Bell. We studied together all the way through vet school. John was in practice in Abilene, Texas, and he said, "Come here and we can do it here." So Jameen and I moved to Abilene, Texas, and we went in practice with John. And in Abilene, we're doing everything. I even did the zoo work. Probably in August or so, the zoo director, as well as probably the superintendent, were both gone one weekend, and one of the college kids that was working there part-time, just feeding and cleaning up, called me and said that one of the tigers had given birth to 4 cubs. So I called the San Diego Zoo and talked to some people there, and they told me since these cubs had been handled, see, they drove the female away from them, and they said since they'd been handled, the best thing you can do is pick out the 2 biggest ones and leave the other 2 with the mother, and put them in an incubator and raise them. And they gave us the formulation for feeding them and one thing and another. I guess we had both of the cubs there at the house for a while. Jameen raised them, and she'd feed them every 2 or 3 hours, and then she'd have to take a wet sponge and emulate or stimulate their digestive tract by licking reflex that the tiger mothers do on the abdomen as well as on the loin area of the cubs, so that they defecate and urinate. And so we had those cubs there at the house, and by this time they were about 2 months old, and they chased the boys and chased Philip and Dell across the backyard and tackle them, and they were getting to be pretty big. I also have to bring up another very important part of my life that we passed up, is that Dell was born in Abilene in 1965 in December, right after we moved there. Yep. Came about 6 weeks early to really disturb everything. We hadn't even picked out a name for him. Then we moved to Norman in 1972, and were there for 4 years. My partner had moved there, and we'd maintained our partnership. But John had moved up there, and he had a pretty good thing going, just doing strictly horses, and thought there was plenty of room for me, so we sold our practice in Abilene and moved there. And as I said, we were there for 4 years, and it didn't ever really fit real well for me. So we went back to Abilene about this time, when I went into the horse business with Pete Baker and some other people, and I did a bunch of Appaloosa horses for a man named Carl Miles, who at that time had probably the biggest and the best known herd of Appaloosa horses in the country. We did very, very well with them. You get an 80 plus percent conception rate, and full survival rate, which is very, very good. Well, I thought the key to breeding a good horse was, number one, having, quote, what you think are good horses to start with, take good care of them, and then get lucky, because that's 95% of the horse business is good luck and having the good sense to recognize it when it's happening to you.
A stallion is really a freak of nature. A stallion that will outproduce himself is really a freak. We were starting a breeding operation in 1978 and needed somebody with that expertise.
Buster Welch, who was a quarter horse trainer, had become associated with King Ranch a couple years before.
He was showing a stallion by the name of Mr. Sanpepe. And Mr. Sanpepe, he was campaigning him for world champion. And Mr. Sanpepe won the world in 1974. We bought Mr. Sanpepe in 1975. But what we needed to get this accomplished was a veterinarian. We needed somebody to breed these outside mares and to really organize our breeding program. And Buster said, well, I know of a veterinarian in Abilene, Texas. And he is a great individual, and let me call him.
And he said, asked me if I'd be interested in coming down to visit King Ranch and look at their quarter horse operation. I told him that I was really busy and I was kind of catching up after having been gone, and I really didn't think I was very interested in it. And I said, in fact, I remember telling him, I said, I was gone for about 10 days. My clients are mad at me. My wife was mad at me because she didn't get to go to France with me. And Buster said, well, you know, of course, he was a terrific people person as well as a good horse trainer. And Buster said, well, he said, you know, why don't you come down here and spend the weekend, and we'll send the airplane for you and take you home in the airplane, and maybe you can get back on your wife's good side. So we went to see King Ranch, and while we were there, they offered me the opportunity to come down there and go to work for them.
John said, he said, I think this is something I'd like to do, but it's got to be approved by Jameen. She's got to bless the deal. King Ranch had a Cessna Citation jet, and I was on that plane, and they flew me from Amarillo to Abilene, pulled up, and John said when that jet pulled up, Jameen got on that jet, she was sold. She said she could do that.
As I said, I went to work down there on the 28th of December 1978 and stayed until 2008.
We had nothing until John came, and John really developed our breeding technology. He developed the ways we tease the mares, how we tease the mares, and so he was the entire quarter horse breeding program.
That was very, very good stock, and they were, of course, they were breeding ranch horses for use on the ranch. At that time, they probably had about 400 saddle horses on the ranch.
We went through every brood mare, and we selected the top 200 out of all of the brood mares. And we said, this is going to be our nucleus.
And did a big AI program, artificial insemination program.
We wanted to freeze some of Mr. Sanpepe's semen as an insurance policy. If something happened to him, we would have some semen in storage that we could rely on. But apparently, when you freeze horse semen, there's not as many live sperm that survive the freezing process. So the percentages of pregnancies that you were getting out of frozen semen might have been 40 or 50%. And then the industry was developing what they called cool semen. It changed the entire industry, where instead of have a stallion or brood mares come to Kingsville, Texas, we were able to collect the stallion, cool the semen down, and send it to Michigan, send it to California, send it to Arizona, wherever the brood mares were that wanted to breed to the stallions we had. So it revolutionized the industry, and John was right in the forefront of that change in the era.
And we started breeding mares for the general public and charging a sizable breeding fee for them.
I think it was over 2,500 registered foals by Mr. Sanpepe that are out in the industry right now.
Oh, we raised the level of these particular ranch horses or cutting horses by quite a bit, certainly, yeah. And here again, we almost glutted the market, let's put it that way. we probably put too many horses out on the market.
When people came to the ranch and were looking at horses and cattle, they expected to see John Toelkes. I mean, he was just part of the personality of King Ranch. John really took care of the people that he worked with. They loved him. All of the employees thought John was so kind. He really looked after his people. He was one of the employees. He was a quinenio. He was really one of the people, and John took care of them. He went to funerals. He went to weddings. You know, he was very close to the people, and Jameen was right alongside. And I'd like to get Janelle on a little bit of the tape to talk about Jameen, because she was a special lady.
There wasn't anything that Jameen couldn't do. And basically there wasn't anybody associated with the ranch or the community that Jameen didn't touch their lives. She had that southern charm that basically brought everyone into the fold.
She came in and helped in anything that needed to be done. If it was an event that King Ranch was doing, she was right in the front of it.
We first did self-guided tours, and then we decided that for $6 a person we would do guided tours, and we started having docents on the tours. Jameen was the first docent, and Jameen was involved in the writing and the guiding and the setting up of all of those tours.
She never met a stranger. She loved the people around her.
I was working on the restoration of downtown because the downtown was just deteriorating so fast. We basically were trying to create that industry to save the downtown. And Jameen helped with all of that. And Jameen and John were so loyal to the ranch. They lived it like we did.
John wore the running W very proudly, and he was a terrific advocate of the ranch, and went about it very humbly.
I feel that it was very much a team situation, and I would not have been successful had they not helped me. And as a result, I think as a member of that team and what we did for those 13 or 14 years, I just think I just was a valuable part of that team, and we did it. That's the way I feel about it. Advice I'll give to anybody is find something that you like to do and do it well. I truly pity people that hate the work that they do. I would hate to have to think that I drove an hour to go to work in the morning to some place that I hated for 8 or 9 hours and then have to drive home in traffic that evening. It's got to be horrible. Yeah. Well, very nice thing about going to work at King Ranch. Part of the discussion we had prior to my going to work there, somebody mentioned during the discussion that, you know, if you have any sons, why, when they're old enough, why, we can hire them to work in the summer times when they're not in school. So when I heard this about the boys being put to work, I thought that was very, very much a benefit, and as it turned out, it was. The boys had been in Kingsville for just a couple of weeks when Philip went to work at the farm, at King Ranch Farm. He was 15, and a year later, Wydell went to work as a cowboy. Spent 2 summers doing that. Cowboying, actually moved on the Lorelis Division with Scott Wright and his wife Mary, and worked there for 2 years before he then moved to the feed yard after he was he wanted more money. They have told me repeatedly, and they told their mother repeatedly, it's probably one of the best things that ever happened to them. The fact that they went to work for other people. I didn't want them to work for me. They'd learned a lot of my tricks. They needed to go learn something from somebody else. You know, this was a town that when we moved there in 1979 had 27,000 people, in the city, and when we left 30 years later, there was 27,000 people in the city. So there was not a great deal of change there, and there was not a great deal of interest left. We'd pretty well explored everything. So I decided to retire, told the boys. Philip invited Jameen and I to move to California, and that's what we did.
What do you think?
I'm very happy that I did. I miss South Texas. I miss Kingsville. I miss a lot of those associations. But on the other hand, the weather, the interaction I've had with our granddaughters here has been wonderful. I've unfortunately lost my wife, and I just look after myself and kind of make myself useful to Philip and Kathy when they need me, and the girls when they need me. And I found out that I sleep a little later in the mornings now too.